But in order to take care of others, you also have to take care of yourself. If you're not helping yourself, you're not going to be any good to anybody else.
Right.
If you completely are incapable of empathizing with others, there's a clinical term for that, and that's called a psychopath. It's also very important to have self-care. And again, not to look at it as a luxury, but as a necessity.
Therapists need therapists. Everybody can benefit from a therapist.
I really want to challenge the idea that endlessly caring for others is virtuous. I really want to challenge that idea.
So today we're talking about when caring hurts.
Compassion fatigue. And it actually came from one of our team members brought it up. She obviously listens. And she said that compassion fatigue, she'd love to hear about, she'd like us to talk about compassion fatigue. So I'm assuming you're aware of what compassion fatigue is.
I am. Yeah.
Okay.
You know, it happens with a lot of caregivers. Pretty much anybody in any helping industry at some point or another, I think, is going to be everyone's susceptible to being having that compassion fatigue, especially when you're in the caring industry. But it also happens with just being a family member.
Oh yeah, I think the quote popular professions that experience compassion fatigue are obviously probably nursing and psychotherapists. They often are on the front lines of trauma or difficult situations, but it's easy to forget though that parents also get compassion fatigue, because as you know, parents, and in particular moms, are always on. They always have to be there,
right?
And it can lead to compassion fatigue also.
I feel it, man. I mean, I'm not a stay-at-home mom. My stay-at-home dad. My wife is a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
And I don't know how she does it. I mean, there's certainly days where she kind of is close to tapping out, like, I can't do this anymore.
Right.
But most days she's just like, she's so even. I don't understand how she does it.
Well, it's probably the mindset too. But
yeah,
I think it's important to first define what compassion fatigue is. Just because you are a compassionate person does not necessarily mean you're going to acquire compassion fatigue. So really, when we talk about compassion fatigue, and I wrote down a formal definition, it's the emotional and physical exhaustion that can result from prolonged exposure to other people's suffering or emotional content, leading to decreased ability to empathize or feel compassion for others. And so another way to describe it could be like emotional burnout, perhaps.
Sure.
When we're constantly exposed to difficult emotional situations. So things in which trauma is experienced, or really high toxic stress levels, that can oftentimes lead to this idea of compassion fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
And it obviously impacts certain types of individuals more than others. And what I mean by that is some people describe themselves, you've probably heard of people describing themselves as empaths, where they have the gift of feeling others' emotions very intensely. And that's a gift that some people have, but it also can be it can also create challenges as far as contributing to compassion fatigue. If you have no way of shutting off that ability to have empathy for others, and empathy is the ability to identify with or experience the emotions of another person.
Right.
If there's no way to shut that off, or no balancing to that empathy that you experience, it can lead to compassion fatigue and emotional burnout. So obviously those that are in the helping professions, like we said, are particularly vulnerable to that. So we talk about nurses, therapists, physicians, those kinds of professions.
Right.
But even, like I said, even parenting is a 24-hour a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year type of commitment, even when our kids get older. But even some friendships can contribute to compassion fatigue. So it's important to kind of keep all that in mind.
So friendships can you expand on that a little bit?
What's that?
Friendships can cause.
Well, if you have a very one-sided friendship, or if you have an individual that you're in a relationship with that is going through some very difficult times, and it's kind of, we've all had that person that when we see their phone call coming through, we're like, oh no, what now?
Do we really want to
and
take
that's
this
kind of a
call?
small,
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a symptom necessarily of compassion fatigue, but it's kind of mirrors what it is. And that is, I just don't know if I have the ability to deal with it. I'm not sure if I can go through this today with this person. That's kind of related to compassion fatigue.
Love the person, but I just can't today.
I just can't today, yeah.
Can't.
Yep.
Is that selfish?
No, we'll get to that. But in order to take care of others, you also have to take care of yourself. And I think in our society, not in our society, but I think a lot of times we feel guilt when we have to put ourselves first as far as taking care of ourselves.
Right.
But what I would argue is that you can't help others if you don't first help yourself. It's kind of the, when you go fly an airplane or when you fly an airline, they always say, put on your own oxygen mask before assisting others.
Right.
And that's just an example of how if you're not helping yourself, you're not going to be any good to anybody else. Right. You first have to help yourself. If you don't have oxygen, and you're busy helping other people, you're eventually going to suffocate, and then you're not going to be any good to anybody.
Right.
And if you look at it from a religious standpoint, regardless of your religious affiliation, but you look at Jesus in the Bible, he took time to step away, and he was probably the most caring person in history, but he took time to step away from helping others in order to fill his own cup, so to speak.
Even still, people would follow him.
Well, that is true.
You're like, oh my gosh,
true.
Okay, we'll do a little sermon on the mount here.
Yeah, but so there's a science behind compassion fatigue, and first it's important to explain the kind of difference. There's several different types of there's a lot of different terminology surrounding this, and it's kind of important to iron it out. There's compassion fatigue, and another way to describe that is empathy overload. And that empathy overload for somebody then can lead to what's called emotional depletion, which is where you're completely spent. You have no more emotional energy to give to somebody else because of that overload of empathy that you've been going through with that other person. And so that's kind of the general gist behind compassion fatigue. Sometimes that is confused with burnout. And burnout is something very, very different. When you think of burnout, typically that's more of a workplace type setting. So it's similar. It's essentially chronic workplace stress. So when somebody's feeling burnt out from work, it's not necessarily from compassion fatigue, but if there's constant chronic stress in the work environment, that's essentially what contributes to burnout. And then the other concept that I think is worth explaining and talking a little bit about is this idea of secondary traumatic stress. Now,
what's that?
It's where you, it's similar to compassion fatigue from the standpoint of somebody else is experiencing a traumatic event, whether it's the death of a loved one, a significant accident or something. You didn't specifically go through that, but because you're in a close relationship with the person that did, you get some of the traumatic runoff from that person.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And that because it didn't happen directly to you, but it's kind of secondary to it, you're also impacted by it. So that secondary traumatic stress or vicarious trauma, you can also call it, does have an impact on us over time as well. So it's important to understand that our brains and our bodies are obviously connected, and it's really important to keep that in mind. There's this idea or this concept of our neurons mirror what they're exposed to, and that's where compassion fatigue and like I said, secondary traumatic stress or vicarious trauma impacts us. So when our brain sees somebody going through something, it has this unique ability to mirror that experience, and that's where. So essentially what happens is the neurons stimulate actually having gone through that actual stress that the other person is experiencing.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
It's not in the moment, it doesn't feel as intense, but that's essentially what's going on when we experience empathy. When you have empathy for somebody, that means you're kind of going through the same things they're going through, helping them experience their emotions, and then you, as an empathetic person, also experience the hurt that they're experiencing. That's your brain's neurons mirroring what the brain is perceiving the other person to be going through.
Why do you think that's something that we as humans need, to have someone else feel the same trauma in some way or another?
Because that's how we relate to others.
Okay.
And so I think it's helpful to explain. There's obviously different degrees of empathy. Some people are extremely empathetic, and they experience other people's emotions and experiences very intensely. Not everybody's like that. Other people, we tend to fall on a spectrum. Some people are more sensitive to the suffering of others, and other people still empathize with them, but not to the same degree.
I see. Okay.
Now, to kind of answer your question, the reason our brains experience that, or the reason our brains have that secondary reaction or go through the similar emotional experience as a person we're in relationship with, because that's how we relate to other people. If you don't have the ability to identify to some degree with what the other person is going through, it's very difficult to connect with that person. And if you completely are incapable of empathizing with others, there's a clinical term for that, and that's called a psychopath.
Right. Okay.
To a degree.
Sure.
And that's what all that means is you have no, like, the plight of other individuals or somebody else's suffering has absolutely zero impact on you. And you can kind of see how that dehumanizes, like if you have no ability to experience what the other person is experiencing as far as an emotional standpoint, that really dehumanizes the other person, because you have no concept of what they may be suffering with or may be going through, and they have no way to relate to that experience on a deeper level.
Interesting. I can see where that can lead to potential issues
right
down the road. Yeah.
And along with that, so when we have empathy for others, and when our brains are kind of mirroring the other's experience, that in turn creates a stress response. So we all are very aware of stress response. The release of cortisol in our system is released when we empathize with others, and that's obviously, as you know, that's the stress hormone that we experience. And then that is what actually contributes to our fatigue, the compassion fatigue that we often experience, or that burnout feeling. When stress is a constant thing, and then empathizing is a constant thing, and we have no way of turning it off, it leads to what we call emotional blunting. And if you're not aware what emotional blunting is, it's just where our brain essentially turns off emotions, and it's where we become numb to our emotions ourselves, and just kind of become flat, which is kind of one of the initial signs that we're dealing with compassion fatigue.
Going from caring about people and having that compassion and having that empathy to all of a sudden just
it's kind of like psychologically throwing up your hands and being like, whatever,
can't do anything about it anymore.
Yeah, because you're just so exhausted from going through the burnout of it, or going through the experience of it.
Sure.
So what are some signs and symptoms of compassion fatigue? I think it's important to identify those. I tend to group them into three areas. There's emotional, there's physical, and then there's behavioral. So emotional signs of compassion fatigue, irritability is a big one. So when a classic sign of compassion fatigue is when somebody is going through something and they're expressing their pain to you, and your response is irritation. That's a big red flag for compassion fatigue. It's your body's and your brain's way of putting up a boundary of saying, I can't deal with this right now, and so I'm going to deflect it or kind of resist against it through getting irritable with the person. Another sign or symptom of compassion fatigue would be numbness, and that's where there is no emotional response whatsoever. You just feel numb, and you have no real emotional connection with the other person, or just generally speaking, you have this sense of numbness, or I call it being flat.
Sure.
There's just no connection with the other person.
Yep.
On a more extreme level, people that have chronic compassion fatigue get very cynical, or they're vulnerable to becoming very cynical, which is they have more of then they now have shifted from caring deeply about another person and experiencing what they've been going through in a very meaningful way, to being cynical or pessimistic about the other person's intentions. Well, that person's just trying to manipulate me, or it doesn't matter how bad it gets, it's always going to get worse. That kind of cynicism kind of bleeds into our psychological thought process. So that's kind of the emotional signs and symptoms. The other side of it is the physical. one way or another, the stress is going to come out. If we can't deal with it, if we can't deal with our stress and our burnout and our compassion fatigue in a psychological way, it's going to come out physically. So some common physical symptoms of compassion fatigue are, shocker, physical fatigue, feeling tired all the time.
Right.
Because you're so exhausted from it, physically, you're going to feel very worn out and stressed. Headaches are pretty common for people that are going through compassion fatigue, particularly for therapists or nurses, for example. We'll just use those examples because we mentioned them earlier in our conversation. They'll identify stress headaches a lot when there's compassion fatigue. They'll get to the end of the day and they'll be so exhausted that their head will hurt. So excessive compassion fatigue can contribute to chronic headaches, for example.
Do you know why? Why is it so exhausting to have empathy for other people, even if you're not doing like physical work?
Yeah.
Why is it so tiring?
Because it's stressful on the body, and like we had mentioned, when you're going through stress, regardless of the type of stress. So there's physical stress that you could be going through, which releases cortisol into your system, but then there's also the psychological stress that you can go through, and that also releases cortisol and the stress hormones, and the response is similar. So, and it's also important to remember that for our brains to process information, that also takes energy. It's easy for us to think that physical exertion burns the most energy. I suppose there's a debate about that, but mental exertion, when you're in the thick of it day in and day out, that also zaps a lot of your energy. It takes a lot of brain power to go through that with somebody.
Right.
And so it's important to acknowledge that just because you're not running a marathon on a particular day, but you're sitting with somebody who's in pain going through it with them, that also burns through a lot of energy as well, which contributes to fatigue.
Using your brain power instead of your muscle power.
Especially when there's no break from it. If you never have a break from it, and you're never given a reprieve from the compassion that you're outpouring to other people, it's going to create even more fatigue. And
that makes sense. Case,
insomnia is a really common physical symptoms of burnout, or in compassion fatigue in particular. And then what we found is that behaviorally, when people are experiencing compassion fatigue, and this is just something for everyone to be aware of, if you're a people person, and we're all people, right? We all need to be around others, but when we're so worn out from the compassion or empathy that we've had for others to the point that we completely withdraw from others, from being in relationships, whether it's withdrawing at work or at times withdrawing at home, even from the ones that we're supposed to be most vulnerable with, that's also a sign of a behavioral symptom that you may be going through compassion fatigue. So it's important to keep that in mind. And then, not surprisingly, particularly people in the helping professions, if they are experiencing significant compassion fatigue, we notice that the job satisfaction completely tanks.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, even though someone really cares about other people, if they never get any break from it, if they're not able to recharge their batteries, so to speak, they're gonna be like, you know what, I just don't like this anymore.
Right.
Because at some point, I would imagine at some point, your body and your mind are gonna be like, you know what, this is killing me.
Yep.
This is not healthy for me.
And I'm just going to shut her down.
Shut her down. Get out.
You're not helping me out, so I'm going to help myself.
And it's almost like a stop, whatever, like a breaker.
Yeah. And I think, obviously people in caregiving roles, people that have that natural slant towards caregiving, they tend to be a care provider or a caregiver at the expense of themselves. And that's really where compassion fatigue really takes root, is when we care for others at the expense of ourselves. That's a problem.
Why do you think we do that?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think there's cultural beliefs surrounding this idea of selflessness and who can be more selfless and give of themselves more. Right. But I also think there's a lot of personal beliefs. I think there's a lot of personal beliefs about sacrificing yourself for the betterment of others, which again is good. But when you do that to such an extreme that you leave no space for your own self-care and your own well-being, it's just simply not a sustainable. It's just simply not sustainable for anybody,
Right.
regardless of your mental or physical fortitude. This concept that you must always be selfless and put others before yourself, above all else, that kind of can lead that's what ultimately leads to the compassion fatigue piece.
You can get a lot of guilt from that too.
Yeah.
Like, there are definitely times where I've said no to, like, something simple as, my girls wanting me to go climb a tree or something with them. One of them just recently asked me to do that yesterday.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I was moving heavy stuff out of my garage and I kind of hurt my lower back. It was from a college injury.
Sure.
We're doing a Romanian deadlift with a regular deadlift weight.
Well,
yeah,
probably not smart.
And I said no. And she was like really sad about that. I'm like, I have to take care of myself. I mean, it may not be, it's kind of a little bit different.
Sure.
But
Sure.
I'm like, I have to take care of myself a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, the other thing that makes us susceptible is this idea of perfectionism. I think we all know how harmful and problematic perfectionism is, but I think nonetheless we all kind of have that belief that if things aren't perfect or if we don't do things just right, that somehow there's a problem. So
Right.
perfectionism plays a role in our susceptibility. I hate using the word boundaries, but blurred boundaries is a big problem for it as well. It definitely causes compassion fatigue from the standpoint that if you don't have a clear line in the sand about where you end and the other person begins, that in itself leaves you very vulnerable to compassion fatigue.
And it's especially hard if you have allowed those lines to be blurred.
Right.
With a specific person or with your job or something like that, and people come to expect you to be not a doormat, but like being always available for someone, being always on with your empathy.
Yeah.
And not saying, hey, you know what, 10 o'clock at night, talking to a client,
Right.
I can't do that.
Right.
I need to have time to sleep. I need to have time to be with my family, that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, if you decide to take back that personal time and have those and bring those boundaries back to where they should be, that creates a lot of stress too, because people are like, what the heck, don't you care about me anymore?
Right. And redrawing the boundaries is always harder than enforcing them in the first place. And I think for a lot of us, we tend to look at boundaries. I mean, it's getting better, but when we're dealing with boundaries in our relationships, our initial idea about them is that they prevent others from accessing us, and that's really not true. The better way to think of boundaries is showing people how they can access us in a healthy manner, rather than keeping people out. They're just showing you the gate to get in, if that makes sense. Henry Cloud, in his book, as a lot of people know about it, his Boundaries book, he talks about, you have a fence around a lawn, and it keeps people out, sure, but there's usually a gate. And so, is the fence designed to keep people out of the lawn? Yes, but it also shows people where they can enter. And so
I never even thought of it that way.
That's how you look at. That's the better way to look at boundaries. It's not designed to keep people out. It's just designed to give them some structure about how they access you as a person. And so when we look at boundaries that way, we can have a healthier perspective of them, or healthier outlook.
That's a new perspective. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
Having a fence, and because the fence is designed to keep people out.
Right.
But then there is a gate.
Yeah.
And that gate shows people the correct way to enter your.
The other way I like to look at it is, I have two neighbors, and we live on a golf course, and one neighbor got annoyed with people driving golf carts through his lawn to get golf balls, understandably so.
Yeah, you bet.
So he put up a no trespassing sign, a no trespassing sign. And that was it. My other neighbor, he's like, I'm really tired of people driving their golf cart through my lawn. I like my lawn. I want my lawn to look nice. I don't want it to be a golf cart track. So he put up a fence. And you can kind of guess which one was more effective. The no trespassing sign is similar to us saying, hey, knock it off. without really reinforcing the boundary, right?
Let me just get my
golf
ball quick, and then I won't trespass again.
It's a suggestion, whereas the fence, my neighbor that put up a fence, it's very obvious that you can't drive through the fence. But if you want to access his backyard, all you got to do is go towards the front and come down the side of his house, and he'll welcome you in anytime. He's sitting out there to hang out. So it's just different. It just kind of shows you, like, that's how boundaries are supposed to work. They're not meant to be suggestions. I suppose the no trespassing sign isn't really a suggestion, but it leaves it
people are able to easily go around
kind of
it.
leaves it open to suggestion,
right.
Whereas the actual fence in my other neighbor's backyard leaves no question about where the golf carts are supposed to go.
Complete side note, aren't you relatively close to the tee box?
Relatively, yeah.
And people are shanking it in your yards?
Yeah, you'd be surprised how many golf balls.
Oh my gosh, even I'm not that bad.
Well,
maybe I am.
I don't know.
I haven't even gotten out there yet this year, so probably maybe go back to beginner's luck.
Yeah, right, beginner's luck. Yeah.
I golf so little.
Yeah.
That every time I golf is pretty much beginner's luck. Yep.
But just kind of, I think when you look at real life examples, we've been talking about nurses and therapists, and the one I forgot to mention is also teachers. If you talk about a group of people that, and I'm not going to be able to name every profession that goes through compassion fatigue, but you talk about a profession that is fraught with compassion fatigue right now, it's the teaching industry.
They're so stressed out.
Not the teaching profession, I should say.
Yeah.
They are asked to do so much. And
with so little.
With so little. Unfunded mandates, and I'm going to get a little bit of a soapbox, but what you're seeing is a lot of teachers are completely exiting the profession altogether and doing something completely different. And I would argue it's not because of the pay, it's not because of that they don't like what they're doing, it's because of their compassion fatigue. They are expected to do so much and to be so much for these students all the time but they feel that they have no real reprieve from it. And so that's kind of an example of how it impacts things. But we've all heard of, every once in a while you hear a story about a physician who they're in their, late 40s, early 50s, and they just completely leave the profession altogether. I'm like, you spent 12, 14 years of your life just learning how to do what you're doing, and 10 years later you're leaving. And that's because of compassion fatigue. It's that one, right. It's kind of it's something that we're not ever really taught about. As we're preparing for these helping fields.
I think it's part of our American culture too, because we always have to. It's always a competition here.
Always a competition. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yep.
If you portray any form of weakness, you're going to be left behind.
Right.
The cream of the crop rises to the top. So we have all these ideas.
Right.
And it's kind of what makes America great, is our American exceptionalism, which we're always pushing and always trying to be better than other people in whatever we're choosing to do. But it also is to our detriment.
For
in a lot of ways, because we never feel that we can just sit and relax. We always feel we have to be doing something.
It was kind of weird it's the American competition or whatever to always be the best. Sometimes I compare our business against other businesses that aren't even in the industry. Like, oh my gosh, that business is doing so well. I want us to be doing this well too. I'm like, well, it's a freaking oil filter company, like
right.
or whatever. I mean, it has absolutely nothing to do with us specializing in mental health treatment in rural areas at all. It's like it's comparing apples to bricks.
Yeah.
And I find myself doing that. I don't know if other people do that, but
I think it's definitely a piece of it.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, though, in some way, shape, or form, we're all dealing with people. We're just dealing with different contexts of people.
Yeah.
I think it's important to keep that in mind. So we've talked a lot about the gloom and doom of compassion fatigue. Maybe we should talk about what kind of helps. I call these strategies for recovery. So recovery and then also prevention. So I think the first thing is to be aware of it and to really acknowledge that, compassion fatigue is a real thing. And I would argue that it probably impacts most of us at some point in our lives in some way, shape, or form. So the first thing is to be aware, not only that it exists, but also the early warning signs in yourself. And it's going to be slightly different. We talked about the behavioral manifestations of them. We talked about that sometimes people withdraw. Sometimes people get pessimistic. You have to know for yourself, what does compassion fatigue look like? For me, I know if I'm starting to withdraw more, particularly at home, if I withdraw and I'm very flat, my family knows something's up and I'm burning out or wearing out. So that's just for me. And it can look differently for other people. Other people, it could be chronic headaches or difficulty sleeping, all those things. So it's really important to know what the warning signs are for yourself. And that oftentimes may take some degree of self-exploration or some degree of self-awareness of how compassion fatigue or compassion burnout impacts us as unique individuals. It's going to be different for every person.
I think my family knows very well what my compassion fatigue is.
Which is?
I just get really snippy. I get really annoyed with absolutely everything. Why can't everything work? Why can't anything work out right?
Broken.
Why can't you just go to sleep? My gosh, you're 2.5 years old. I've tucked you in 1,000,000 times. I've tucked you in like a burrito. Knock it off. Go to sleep. I mean, I get really short, and then I always go back and seek forgiveness because they're children.
Right.
The
other thing that's important this is more of a prevention thing, is to make sure that you have strong boundaries. The therapy profession, the mental health profession, a lot of those boundaries are professionally built in the form of ethics.
Mm-hmm.
Not all therapists follow the ethics, which is why we have ethical violations, right? But they're kind of pre-built in for us in a way. But there is still, we as helping professionals in any helping field, you have to be aware of what boundaries you have. You can't be on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for clients, for example. In the nursing profession, there's never a shortage of overtime that you could obtain. Well, sure, you may work 90 hours a week and that makes for a great paycheck, but is that really a healthy boundary for yourself personally? Is that really sustainable over time?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not. So boundaries are important as well as the self-care piece. And there is a big push towards self-care, but what I've noticed in talking to people is even though we all verbally acknowledge that self-care is important, at the end of the day, most of us, or a lot of us, I should say, kind of poo-poo the idea.
Right.
Like, it's important for other people, but not for me. I can just power on and move through this. But it's important to know that self-care is very, very important.
I'm an achiever.
So things like sleep, nutrition, having something you enjoy doing other than work, exercise. And what I always say is it's important to look at those things not as luxuries that we should be able to participate in, but as necessities.
Yeah, I noticed that I feel guilty for doing something that I genuinely enjoy. Like I'm actually having fun doing this. Yeah. And there are times where I feel guilty about it because to me it feels selfish.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of, I think you hit the nail on the head is, we tend to feel, I'm speaking people in general, we tend to feel like there's this constant, we're supposed to be selfless at the expense of ourselves.
Like we don't deserve to do something that fulfills us.
Right. Or like you said, maybe we feel like it's a competition to who can do the most. But it's very important to have self-care. And again, not to look at it as a luxury, but as a necessity.
Right.
Obviously having peer support. So, when we're going through stressful times or we're very empathetic and working through a lot of people, it's important to have peer support to talk with others who help us understand or that understand to a degree what we're going through. Mm-hmm. That's very, very important.
So peer support, does that mean family members, coworkers, friends?
I think it depends on, it's unique to the individual. What I would say when you mentioned family members is, I think the first person that comes to mind in family is your spouse if you're married or in a relationship, or your partner. But you need to remember that your partner or your spouse can't be everything to you all the time.
Right.
You need to have your own tribe, so to speak, that you can go to. I'm not saying that you need to have numerous close friends, but you can't have your spouse or partner be your dump. You can't dump everything on them,
because you also get compassion fatigue with your significant other too.
Well, if you're in a relationship with someone and you're just constantly dumping on them, they are going to get burnt out from you,
right?
And you're going to get to be too much. So it's important to kind of keep that all in context.
Mm-hmm.
And then certainly professional help if you're really struggling with it and you're really feeling completely spent. Sometimes therapy or coaching when necessary is excellent. You know, a lot of licensed mental health professionals, therapists swear or strongly recommend that therapists be in therapy. And there's a reason for that is you need to have an outlet to dump off all that intense emotional content that you're going through constantly.
I would say I think for sure, you know, people who know they need it need therapy. Therapists need therapists.
Yeah.
I would say it's everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody can benefit from a therapist. I mean, sure, I'm going to say it because we own a mental health company.
Sure.
But it's true. I mean, it doesn't matter who you go see. To have some sort of therapy, to have someone who's emotionally disconnected from your stressors and can provide you a good objective. I think objective is the right word for it. A good objective advice on how to help process this stuff.
Yeah, objective feedback.
Yeah.
Yep. So I kind of want to just kind of in wrapping things up. I really want to challenge the idea that endlessly caring for others is virtuous. I really want to challenge that idea. Like there's a big difference between genuinely caring for others because you care about them and being a martyr for it. And if we're caring endlessly for people because we feel it's a virtue, that's very harmful to us as individuals. At some point, you have to, like I said before, you have to put your own oxygen mask on first before helping somebody else with their oxygen mask. If you can't take care of yourself, how are you going to be expected to take care of others?
You're being a bad example to other people too, I would say.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, yeah.
Well, you're just not going to be any good. If you're burnt out, or if you have emotional burnout or compassion fatigue, you're not going to be your best self. You're not going to be able to show up for others, even though that's important to you.
Yep.
And so it's important to embrace this idea of what I call sustainable compassion, and that is, and it's different for everybody. All of us have to figure out, you know, what's our cadence for being able to be compassionate towards others, and so what's that unique mix of self-care and then being able to outpour to others that works for us so that we can be the best version of ourselves for other individuals when they need us to show up for them.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to keep that in mind.
Right.
You know, so kind of in closing, I'd call on people to kind of reflect on their own experiences. Like, when have you felt depleted from caring? And it's important to kind of be aware of that, to kind of know what are some of the signs leading up to possible compassion fatigue. And if you're able to be introspective enough to identify those, then you'll be able to head it off at the curve, so to speak. Or maybe somebody's actually going through compassion fatigue right now and they don't realize it. And it's important to identify, you know, am I running on empty right now?
Right.
And if I am, what do I need to do about it, to take care of it? And the challenge that we often experience with that is the guilt. Well, if I take a step back, people are going to suffer, or people aren't going to receive the help, or whatever term you want to use.
Right.
But continuing to run on empty will eventually catch up with us. To the point where we won't be able to help anybody anyway.
Right.
So I would encourage. I had one small, tangible step for people, but then as I was drafting the outline for this conversation, I realized that's really not a small step, because it's a very difficult one for everybody.
A big one.
And that is, I would encourage people to say no to something, to try saying no to something.
Even that one call from someone saying, "Hey, do you have a minute?"
And to say no to that feels so gut-wrenchingly guilty.
Feels like you're feeling somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
but you're not.
Try saying no. I would encourage people to say no to something, not just for the sake of saying no, but saying no when it's relevant to you. That's when it's important for you to be able to step back and not engage with something. Oftentimes, saying no is the most difficult thing to say, but it can be one of the most healthy things to say as well.
It's honestly liberating too. I mean, no doesn't mean not ever. You can just say no, not right now.
Yeah.
I need to have some time for myself to recover so I can be the best version of me
right
for you when I am able to get to it.
Yeah. Yep.
That's a hard one.
Yeah.
That's a hard one. I used to be a yes man.
Yeah.
And then I tried leading with no, but that also didn't work either. So there's also a balance that you got.
There's a balance.
You got to strike a balance.
Yep. Yep. And then in closing, I would just remind people that, caring is a gift.
Yeah.
That it's a gift that we can give to others, but it's also one that needs to be cared for also.
Mm-hmm.
You can give it to others, you can care for others, but you also need to care for yourself.
I would agree with that. And thanks, Josh. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, John.
That was a good one.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Non-Static Podcast. If you want to keep the conversation going, sign up for the Non-Static newsletter at nonstatic.org. And if you or someone you care about is struggling with their mental health, you can connect with us anytime at Inspire Services at inspireservicesllc.com. Take care, keep moving forward, and as always, enjoy the journey.